Well, hey guys, welcome to Figure It Out. This is the YouTube channel where we take collectible action figures out of the box and we try to figure out some different dioramas or ways in which we can display these figures based on the artwork that is presented around them, if it's from a comic book or a scene, if it's a movie. And this is the first stab I'm going to take into creating a diorama. So I'm going to figure it out and invite you to join me on the journey. For this first effort, I'm taking this Conan action figure since I'm pretty geeked about Conan. This is a collectible from NECA, and it is the Pit Fighter Conan, the original release, the first series, I believe, and you can see that it is extremely well detailed. Such a great figure when it comes to Arnold's face, muscles. Everything about it is just absolutely exceptional. His battle garb, he's got these absolutely great gauntlets which have the spear tips on the end. On the elbows it has some other I guess implements of death. And so if you've seen the movie, the original 1982 Conan starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know that at the beginning of the movie he was a pit fighter. And so we're going to look at those pit fighter scenes, see what we can come up with. I feel like this should be a fairly simple first leaping off point when it comes to making a diorama. So let's see how it goes. Oh, this figure does also come with a couple things. It comes with this Victory Standard, which we'll also put in the diorama. It also comes with a couple of battle axes, which I've got behind me. These two battle axes as well. So when I started planning out this build, I watched the video of the 82 Conan film a bunch of times. The problem was I could never get a real distant view of the fighting pit to gain scope and exactly what it looks like until I came across this image from the movie taken from one of the production stills. And here you can see kind of the walls are a little bit sloped, the rocks or the stones are rather flat, and it's got these kind of tiki images, these heads on top. So this is what I'm basing my build on, and this is where I start. So I'm gonna take a minute and plot out what the base is gonna look like, the sides, and go ahead and get those measured and cut. Everything I watched says make sort of long, smooth, flat cuts with the knife, and that's what I try to do to get those straight on the sides. And one more. This is going to be three-sided if you count the floor, so it's the bottom part, the base, the back, and then the left side is how I'm going to create this diorama. And in that you can see I've kind of cut an angle on one end of the back wall. I did this so that I could get a slope on the left-hand wall. Now I'm just going to take a sharpened pencil and create the stone shapes. I'm looking at the image itself so that I can even kind of fashion what some of those rocks look like in the movie, just to keep it close. So I got the back wall done. Now I'm just working on doing those stone shapes for the side wall, the left-hand wall. Again, just taking a sharpened pencil and pushing down some to create some score lines. After we got all the score lines done, I'm taking a molding tool and I'm just pressing in on the XPS foam just to create a little bit more division, separation, kind of give some edge to those stones because they're not perfect. And of course, just like everybody else does online, get that aluminum foil ball and roll it over everything. And this creates a really dramatic effect, makes it look like rock. Now that I've got that done, I want to go ahead and glue it up. Again, on Figured Out, we're just trying to make sure we get these things done according to plan. I wanted to line up those grout lines, so to speak, on those rocks, which turns out really wasn't necessary once the full thing was done. I'm using some hot glue. Wasn't really sure, honestly, what I should use. I wasn't sure if the hot glue was going to melt this or not, but it didn't. It was fine. And now I get confused as to which way it's supposed to go. Give me a second. And there we go. Again, I'm trying to match up those lines on the back wall and the side wall. But once I got everything fully assembled, I figured out and painted it, figured out that that didn't matter. All right, putting in the bottom of the diorama here, and you kind of see what this looks like. And you'll see how that left hand wall is going to be sloped once I get this thing all glued up. Once I put it in place, I wanted to go ahead and just sand off the edge just a little bit all across the top. The top wall looked a little too cut perfect, so to speak. So I'm just going to take my sanding block and knock that corner down a little bit. There you can see that little triangle piece that I took off the back wall, glued it across the front to give it additional stability so it won't rock backwards or rock toward the left because of that slant. It matches perfectly on that side. And now I'm going to take just a piece of foam board and cut it to go across all those seams in the front. And I'm going to glue that on with some hot glue. I'm eventually going to paint this black. I wish that I had just used some black foam board, but I didn't. So I'll just paint that after the fact. So now you can kind of see how that left wall has a bit of a lean back, but it goes straight up and down. All right, so I'm looking at these little tiki heads, and I'm trying to figure out how in the world I'm going to make these guys. And what I decided to do was just cut it out of XPS foam, just a 1-inch foam block. Those were about 2.5 inches tall-ish, somewhere in that neighborhood, 3 inches tall, and 2 inches wide. So I'm just taking my X-Acto knife, and rather than make you watch some tedious cutouts, we're just going to go super fast through this. But just traced what they kind of look like as I was looking at the picture, and then I'm going to cut some relief in there by chopping out some of that XPS foam. Really isn't as hard as I thought it would be. I thought it would be kind of difficult, but keeping a sharpened blade on my X-Acto knife really helped make this process go fast. And just take your time and whittle away at it, and you can kind of come up with some really good looking pieces, especially since they're stone and they don't at all have to be perfect. And I thought that was part of my issue, was I was going to have to make these things really perfect, but considering these are supposed to be kind of ancient idols and weather worn and beaten, that all worked actually pretty well. So when I got them done, you can see how they turned out. Actually, I glued a little nose on that guy just because it looked like he needed something to come out a little further compared to the picture. But rolled them, and with aluminum foil, now I'm going to glue them across the top. I'm going to put one in the corner like we saw in the picture, and one on the back toward the right as it was in the picture as well. Okay, now I'm in my second workspace, which is actually in the garage. And just so you know about this particular video, when I first started shooting the video, I was doing narration while I was going along. Turns out that was terrible. I was just nattering along, and so in this particular one, you'll see I occasionally you'll see my mouth moving, but nothing's coming out. I took all that away because it was really horrible. Anyway, you're welcome. So now I'm just mixing some plaster with some PVA glue and a little bit of water, and I'm hoping I can strengthen the seams, the joints, and kind of take away some of those joint spaces in each of these by using this. As it turns out, it wasn't altogether necessary, and I can tell you why in a little bit, but just using the old finger smear method. what I wanted it to look like is I wanted it to look like that sand had kind of blown up into the corners, like what you might get if this were indeed an outdoor space. And then about halfway through, I remembered I was going to take one of these clear plastic figure stands that has the peg on it, and I was going to glue it down before I did the plaster so I could plaster around it. And then I was like, oh, I forgot. Again, remember, this is what Figured Out's all about. So I take some, with my plaster hands, and take some super glue and glue that stand down. Then we'll go ahead and finish out the plaster part and get that all squared away nice and smooth. Covering the seams from the glue down on the tiki heads, the idol heads. Also, since I'm out in the garage, the lighting is terrible, and I apologize about that. I have since fixed it and made it a different lighting situation, but as it is, man, it's terrible. But anyway, for this particular bit, I wanted to make the bottom of the base a sandy texture, and so what I did was I got some sanded grout, and that's important. You get the sanded kind, not the smooth grout. There's two different kinds. So I got sanded grout, a little gray sanded grout, mixed it up, and got it to about a pudding consistency so I could spread it around, but it would stay where I wanted it to go. And again, that was a little bit of trial and error trying to figure out how much water to put in, but that's all it is grout, and it should harden like concrete is the goal. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, I really didn't need to do the plaster in the corners, because I was going to do this grout, but, you know, still figuring it out. I also made some fake feet. I wanted some footprints in the sand, and so I traced my action figures' feet onto cardboard, glued them onto some popsicle sticks, and just sort of stamped away to make the bottom of this thing have some footprints in it. Then, which is a very common thing to do, I'm painting the entire project with a mix of black craft paint and Mod Podge. All the videos I saw on how to do dioramas all talk about this magic of Mod Podge and paint together. And really, when you're putting it over XPS foam, it gives it sort of a it's a hardening agent so that the foam's not as vulnerable to dents and things like that. And it worked decently well. I didn't see it quite as magic, but now that it's dry, I'm going to actually apply some regular paint. I'm just going to start with a little bit darker brown on the walls, and then a little more sandy tan on the base, the floor. To be honest, I went through the painting process probably 10 to a dozen times, just wanting to get everything right. So I'm not going to show you all of that because it gets a bit tedious, but I will let you know the process. So this is just the first coat of brown. I am normally left-handed, but occasionally when doing kind of some tedious painting, it gets a little awkward, and with a pinched nerve in my neck, my hand will go numb, so sometimes I'll go right. I'm semi-ambidextrous, and I can do some of the more large motor skills with my right hand, which kind of defeats the camera angle. Now I'm going to do some dry brush. There was a little bit of a secret. If you use a makeup brush, you can get that dry brush going, and it looks pretty good. So I gave it a shot. I'm not sure if I like the makeup brush as much. I think really the reason why maybe I don't is because I don't think I was quite aggressive enough with it. I was super timid about putting this dry brush stuff on because I didn't want to mess anything up. So I'm just doing a lighter tan on the back walls. It's actually the same color as the sand because I mixed up a bunch of that paint. I'm going to do a tan dry brush and then go to a gray and then to a white. And then we're going to dark wash all that. So I switched to a normal brush, I felt like I had a little bit more control on the dry brush process then, but I don't even know if that's true. So you can see I'm really kind of going super light, and having figured out what I need to do, I probably would maybe be a little bit more aggressive with the dry brush, because honestly it took me, well, that one got aggressive. It took me like, I don't know, like 12 coats of, hey, let's go dry brush. So we kind of have that looking like we want it to look. Let's go dry brush, and then we're going to come back with a dark wash. Here's the dark wash. I'm using black on the walls and a brown wash on the sandy ground because I didn't want that to darken up too much. And really what ends up happening is after I dark wash the first time, I do some more dry brushing of some highlights. And I did probably dry brush highlights and dark wash a number of times until I got it right. Maybe a total of 2 or 3 times. So, but we give the whole walls a nice dark wash. I had a really kind of a neat discovery right around in here, and that is as I was sort of doing this dark wash over the walls, I noticed I was getting these drips, and when I first started getting these drips, I started, man, I need to brush these in. But then it kind of started reminding me of like what you might see in, you know, some just gross dirt just dripping down these walls, like from all the people above watching, and just some streaky stains coming down. And I really started liking what that looked like. So I started to leave some during the different processes to see if I could get some of those to be subtle but yet still stick out. So like I said, I did a brown wash on the base, the bottom, because I didn't want the sand to be too contrasted with the wall. All right, once I got everything painted up after a dozen coats or so, I definitely wanted to wire in some torches. And so I bought a box of toggle switches. These are these tiny little switches, little on-off. I'm going to use that little triangle piece that I attached to the side as a place to mount this switch. So I cut the grooves to insert the pins, and then cut around the switch because it's supposed to be sort of a pressure fit. So I wanted to be sure that it's going to be super tight. So cutting this out, I pre-wired some wire stubs on the back of the switch and then popped it into place. And it fit really well. I was happy with that. Next was to go ahead and attach it to the battery pack. And so for a switch, you just want to go through the 2 hot leads or what the switch separates. So the switch is going to go on the 2 hot leads. You have on your battery pack, you have a ground wire, which is the black one that comes out, and then the red wire, which is the hot. And so you want to send the hot from the battery pack to the switch, and then out from the switch, you want to go to your wiring to your hot. But the negatives, they don't go through the switch. And so you can see the little black wire that's coming off the back or the top of that battery pack. That's going to get attached straight to the wiring of the torches that I've already wired up. I'm going to put some heat shrink over these connections. I put heat shrink over all the connections. You can see there on the left that I've already got one of the torches squared away. I've actually got all of them wired up. It was a super simple process. I used those little LED lights from those tea light candles because I wanted them to flicker, and those LEDs flicker. So I just wired those in a sort of a wiring sequence of 3 going to the end. So there's a third one that ties in the end. And now the switch is wired, and all the torch stubs are wired as well. I'm going to glue the battery pack right there on the back of the diorama, so it'll be easily accessible. There we go. Quick test to make sure that everything works. 3 wired torches. And there we go. Everything's working right. Alright, fully painted, ready for torch installation. So I've got all these wires just sort of hanging off the back. I'm really afraid to poke a hole in this thing, but I've got my my heated foam knife with the point on it. I'm just going to press a hole in, and hopefully it's where I want it to be for the torches. But I'm telling you, I was like, I don't want to have to start this whole thing over again, so don't mess up. So I need to make 3 holes in the back for the torches to come out. Now in the movie itself, you may say, well, hey, they didn't have torches on the walls. That is absolutely true. The torches were actually held by the crowd, but man, there was no way I was going to be able to get the crowd done, so I was just going to put torches on the walls. So a little bit of a departure from the movie. Now I'm just going to bulk up the heat shrink and the wires a little with some hot glue, just to kind of give the torches some body, so it doesn't look like a wire in a heat shrink tube. So I'm using this to kind of the hot glue, some strips of hot glue to kind of make it look like wood. And once it's painted and installed correctly, I gave up on the toothpick, by the way, it just wasn't working. So one of the things I wanted to do is make some torch brackets, something to hold these torches, and I got these little eyelets, these eye screws, and I liked what they looked like, except they had this gap, and so I'm trying to figure out how I can close this gap. So my first thought was, well, since I enjoyed soldering the wires so much, why don't I just drop a piece of solder and bridge this gap with some solder? Well, guess what? That's not what solder's for, that kind of distance, and man, I struggled to make this thing work. So I thought, well, maybe I can put enough solder on there and then take it to my sander or grinder and get it ground down. I left this on here. It's a fail, but there's also a pretty funny part where I kind of forget that, hey, you know, a soldering iron's hot, and when you touch metal with it, it also makes the metal hot, which is quite funny. So here I am trying to drop all the solder on here. It's not going very well, but when I finally get it done, time to take it off, and I burned myself. Hey, we're figuring it out. So my second thought is, well, maybe I can bridge the gap in these little eye screws with some hot glue, and I'll let that set up, and when it sets up, I can maybe take my knife and carve it down, and then once painted, you're not going to see it at all. So I start to carve on this, and you can see that chunk of glue immediately dislodges because it's not sticking to that metal. Where I don't know why I thought I could just maybe hold it in place and carve it and maybe glue it back. I don't know, but this became a monster fail as well. So now I'm going to try something else. And what I did do, and what finally worked, was I took some toothpicks, some round toothpicks that I had in the kitchen, and I cut the tiniest piece of toothpick, and I'm going to shove it in that crack. The good thing about wood is it has a little compressive quality to it, so if you get it just slightly bigger, then you can push it where you want it to go. And so I'm going to take a minute, and you can see the one in the background has already been completed. But what I really like about this particular solution is it's not very elegant, but it worked really well, and once painted up, it looks like it's a completed circle, like we actually have a bracket like what you would see in something, you know, medieval or the Hyborian age like that. So I'm just a little dab of super glue on these guys will hold that wood in place moving forward, and then we can paint them up to match. So after I got this done, I gave a little practice to see how Arnold would stand on that little peg that I installed, and he did not stand at all. Very imbalanced. And so I'm just going to grind that off and leave the footprint. And I was so annoyed by this, I can't even tell you.
But I got my tool out since that wasn't going to work. Got my little Dremel out and just sanded off that little nub. Going to paint up the torch brackets here so we can put those around the torches, hold them in place. So my last little bit before I got complete is I wanted to make a shield as a little bit of kind of scatter terrain, if you will. There's a shield that comes with the figure itself that's attached to its base. And I liked it, but I couldn't take it off the base. I don't want to ruin the base that comes with it, so I'm going to make my own shield here. And what I did was I got a piece of foam board, and that little center button is a furniture glide that I clipped part of the nail off the back, stuck it into the middle of that rounded piece. Those plastic bands I'm gluing up are zip ties, and they're really hard to glue edge to edge, so I'm using some super glue accelerant. And I'm just going to try to marry up these two pieces so that they can sort of be a bit pronounced on the shield itself, which you'll see momentarily when I get this done. I've never used the super glue with accelerant before, and I want to tell you, it works so great. So if you're struggling with super glue and holding things in place, man, that accelerant, it dries in at touch. So once I got those two pieces of zip tie glued together for banding, I'm now going to band the shield edge with it so that you don't see that that is just foam board. Just a little bit of super glue there. I'm going to spray the inside of my band, and we're going to get this thing on there. So now that I've got that glued up, I'm going to put some cross pieces using the same zip ties and just measure them, cut them to fit, and glue them on as sort of 4 pieces there. Nothing too exact. And now I gotta find that. Alright, got the 4 pieces glued on, so time to kind of mark it up a little bit. So I'm taking a hook razor and just scarred that thing. Again, here's my Mod Podge mix. Obviously, I'm putting it in an old jar of black bean and corn salsa. Free advertisement. So give it a base coat of the Mod Podge in black, and then we're going to come back and paint it. Now painted, I gave 2 contrasting colors of brown, a light brown, dark brown, and I'm just going to dark wash the whole thing. The brown itself, the lighter brown, didn't work really well, and so what's not shown is in the final product, I went and got some copper metallic paint painted back over it. So here we are complete. Super excited about this particular piece. You can see the shield there, the scatter pieces. None of that's glued down. The pieces that come with itself. You can see the flames flickering. All in all, I am incredibly happy with this display. In case you're wondering, it does go in a small little cubby in the room, and that's it in its display place, which you can see I've measured it to fit. That's why it is cut the way that it's cut.
So what did we figure out during this build? I think quite a bit. This being my first diorama, I learned a lot about what to do. A couple things. First of all, soldering is a lot of fun, but you also have to be aware that metal gets hot when you solder it, and you need to give it a minute to cool down. Putting together the LEDs and the wiring I thought was going to be super difficult, but it was not. It was actually quite easy. I love the fact that we used the LEDs from those little tea light candles, and they cause these to flicker. I also learned that sculpting the flame was not difficult if you use the right product. A lot of guys online were using hot glue and just trying to form that, but it actually seizes up kind of fast. I used liquid nails, clear silicone, and just a dab on the top of the LED bulb, and sculpting it with a toothpick went really, really well. And I think they actually look fantastic, and that's probably how I'm going to continue to do those flames. I also figured out that these stands that come with the figures, or even the aftermarket, the ones that you can buy secondary stands for these, they just don't work. They don't work well when you're trying to put them into a diorama. What you really need is you really need to find something like what I found, which is a roofing nail with the tip of it, the head of it cut off, and they fit really, really well. Again, I want to be able to remove the figures, so that allows that stability. It can actually be a little bit taller than those little bumps are, and so you saw in the video how I had to cut that one off. Just by completing this, when I put this in its place for display, I noticed it was still a little plain, and so I printed out the crowd scene from the movie, just from a video still, and it's the crowd that actually is in the Conan movie, and they're there around the pit for the pit fights, and just printed it out on color paper, put it on some hardboard behind here, and just glued it up, and just to give it something so when it's set back in its little storage space, it looks really, really good. So I think the last thing that I figured out was really painting these things is an absolute pleasure. It is phenomenal to see these dioramas come to life when you start with a darker base, and then you build up on those light dry brushings, and then come back with a dark wash. I figured out that the drips on the walls made it look just awesome. I felt like that made it look like this dirty, dingy outdoor space, like a stadium made out of stone, and made it look really, really good. It's not crazy difficult to sculpt out of this XPS foam, as long as it doesn't have to be perfect, and so I figured that out as well. All in all, for my first attempt, I couldn't be happier. I am thrilled with what this thing looks like. And so thank you guys for joining me on the journey. Don't forget, if you enjoyed the video, to subscribe to the channel, give it a like. I really appreciate that. And we'll see you next time on Figure It Out.